Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Journey to Thrive podcast. I'm Deacon Jim Friend, the Director of Mission Advancement, and I'm so glad that you're joining us today. If you find this conversation meaningful, please consider subscribing and sharing it with others who care about our clergy and our men and women religious. Our podcast is a ministry of the St. John Vianney Center, where we've been supporting the mental, emotional, and spiritual health of clergy and religious for almost 80 years. Next year is our 80th anniversary. You can follow us on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, and X. And you can also listen to this podcast wherever you get your podcasts, or you can watch us on YouTube. We'll include links to today's guests and other helpful resources in the show notes of this episode. So let's get started. We're celebrating Spiritual Care Week this week. It's a national observance that honors the important role that spiritual care plays in hospitals, healthcare institutions all around the country. This year's theme invites us to reflect on the legacy of spiritual care, how it began, how it continues, and how it evolves to meet the needs of those that we serve. At St. John Vianney Center, spiritual care has always been a part of our vital mission to support the health and wellness of clergy and religious. And today we're going to explore the past, the present, and the future of spiritual care here at SJVC through the experiences of two very special guests. First, I'm honored to welcome Sister Ann David. Welcome, Sister.
Thank you.
Great to have you here today. Sister served as the very first pastoral care counselor here when the department was first taking shape, and this ministry has been woven into the heart of our clinical program. And joining us as well is Jillian Tutak, our newest spiritual care advisor. Welcome, Jillian.
Thank you.
Jillian brings tremendous perspective and a deep compassion to this important work. Together, Sister Ann and Jillian will represent the continuous thread of care that has supported our residents for decades now. We'll hear about the beginnings of this ministry, how it has evolved, and what hopes lie ahead for the future. Well, let's get started. So let's start with what is spiritual care? So why don't we start with Jillian? For our listeners, can you describe what spiritual care is and why it's such an important part of our ministry here at St. John Vianney Center?
Yeah, so spiritual care is, I think, a really important part of our ministry here because at St. John Vianney, we talk about wellness in body, mind, and spirit. So spiritual care really focuses on the spirit aspect and how you're doing spiritually, because a lot of times when the residents come in, they have all of these either cognitive issues or more tangible things that they're struggling with. And their spiritual life either aids them in their struggle or is another part of their struggle. Maybe they are really struggling to see God in their situation, or maybe they're angry and turned away from God, or maybe their faith is the only thing that they have holding on to help them move forward. So we have the honor and privilege of helping to nurture that relationship with God, kind of take a pulse on where they're at and figure out how together on their healing journey that themselves and God can journey together and work towards this wholeness that we're striving for.
And it really is beautiful to see from all of our perspectives, Jillian. I know that sometimes we have residents who are so distraught that they don't even necessarily want to attend Mass.
Mm-hmm.
And you see them attending Mass, and our chapel, the Our Lady of Hope Chapel, plays such a beautiful part in their wellness journey, if you will. And you see them then attending Mass, then maybe if they're a priest, they're celebrating Mass, and then seeing them offer their closing reflections as they leave at a discharge liturgy is probably one of the highlights of getting to work here, I think. So
yeah, definitely. And I remember distinctly my first week here. So I started back in October. So I'm almost coming on to a year of being here. But I remember my first discharge Mass. So every Wednesday, anyone that is going to be discharging from the center gets celebrated at Mass. And I remember Pope Francis a while back had said that the church should be the hospital for the broken. And I never really saw that more concretely than I did in that moment, and how beautiful it was that all of the residents coming together, and there's pews on both sides of the altar so that when they can celebrate, there's so many people just up at the altar and just hearing their stories and how grateful and how much God has helped them, and this center has helped them find that healing it's a beautiful thing every Wednesday to be a part of, and to witness to that is just wonderful.
I couldn't agree more. Sister Ann, what was the original founding vision for creating this pastoral care department with your colleagues? And do you feel that from what you're hearing from Jillian and I, does it sound like the spirit of it has remained the same?
Absolutely, it has. It certainly has developed into a much more thorough program through the years. How the department came about was I was finishing graduate school, and the administrator at St. John Vianney was Sister Joan Dreisbach, who was a Franciscan sister. And I asked her if they would be interested in having me work there. And when I came, what was also happening simultaneously was Father Charles O'Hara was the chaplain here, and he had just graduated with a degree in pastoral counseling. And Diana Hoffman, who was a registered nurse here, completed her degree in pastoral counseling. And so we were young and enthusiastic and quite willing to introduce this to the hospital. So, and I think it's important for people to know that back in that's 1986. So we're going back a few decades. Is that pastoral counseling was offered primarily to ordained people in the Christian denominations. And even the professional organization would not allow non-ordained people to be a part of it. And what was happening in the world was that there were more pastoral counseling programs evolving, and eventually the organization needed to rethink and include non-ordained persons into it. And I also think at the same time, psychology was evolving, because psychology wasn't very welcoming of spiritual and religious issues back then. So it was a vision to help our clients bring in their relationship with God, their struggles with church, heal their self-image. Just as Jillian had spoken back then, many of the people who came to us had the same issues.
Sister, how did you find your way here to St. John Vianney Center?
Well, I found myself here wanting an opportunity to use my clinical expertise. And the thing that impressed me was the opportunity to integrate faith and psychology into the treatment. And I had just, as I said, I finished a pastoral counseling program, but my background in religious life was also in vocation and formation ministry. So that was something that I was able to bring here.
That's beautiful. And what a blessing that you all had the wisdom also to recognize eventually that it needed to evolve, right, into just not only ordained folks, but non-ordained ministers of the church, because as you both know, we serve, clergy and religious who are not ordained, but certainly serve the church and experience many of the same challenges that we all do. So speaking of those challenges, Sister, I'm just curious for, from a historical perspective, what were some of the needs that you were seeing among the residents as you started this new program?
I would say to you, back then, 75% of the residents here were women and 25% were men. The women were coming. Let me just say it this way. If we historically look at what was happening in religious life, Structures in religious life were changing. Many communities were inviting sisters to take more self-responsibility, to think for themselves. And what was happening for religious who came from, I'd say, extremely dysfunctional backgrounds, histories of severe abuse, is that the structures that used to hold them together were no longer there. And so what was coming out was anger at the system, and the sense of obedience. Tell me what to do. Put it in the hands of God, as opposed to how is God in this experience with me, was altering their life, because what they knew was consistent was no longer there. So I think what was happening here at St. John's is that the abuse issues were also something new that were coming to the foreground, both in psychology and in our world. So we were grasping at books. How do you find more information on this? This was all the pre-Dallas Charter information, okay? And I think it's important to look at how both the church, the world, and treatment was changing. And so I would say to you, along with one of the things we experienced, was that people who were severely abused by mother or father also had very critical images of God. God who was punishing, God who was Father, Son, and Holy Spirit were difficult to pray to. So where was God in the abuse? And they felt extremely guilty, sinful. And for sisters, the male images of God left people feeling condemned, and that God wasn't available for them. So they felt guilty of not wanting to pray or go to liturgy. The other thing that was happening was that religious communities were beginning to not wear religious garb anymore, religious habits. And so when religious women came here, they were asked not to wear them, all right? Because what we found was that for many of them, their identity was being a sister. And that identity, when they went into religious life at 16 or 18 years old, they didn't have any self-identity. So we were helping them find out who they were as human beings, not as religious, who happened to be sisters. So that was part of the issues that were happening early on.
And it sounds like and thank you for sharing all that, sister, because it really sounds like you've even delved into a little bit of how spiritual care can contribute to their overall healing and recovery, not just their spiritual journey, but the psychological piece, the understanding of themselves as individuals and their role in the world, and helping them even to mature in that, because maybe it wasn't properly even developed as they came into formation at a very young age. Is that accurate?
And I would say to you, the other thing is there was a sense of detachment from their bodies. They could not see their bodies as holy, and especially if they had histories of abuse. So trying to help them see how chastity is about a vow of loving commitment, of being loved by God, really needed a lot of re-education, because of abuse, they already thought that they were sinful and guilty. So we needed to really walk with them in relearning what this means.
That's beautiful, Sister. And are there any moments, I'm just curious, that you can share, recognizing everything is confidential, but are there any
Sure.
moments or memories that you have that were particularly meaningful for you?
Yes. I remember a young sister who came to John Vianney. And in those olden days, it was not uncommon for people to stay a year to 2 years for treatment.
Wow.
And one of the sisters had what used to be labeled as multiple personality disorder. And she was abused by both her mother and her father. And her experiences of God were very foreign to her. And so one of the things that I was asked to do by one of the therapists was, could we have a ritual around forgiveness of what happened by her mother? And I remember thinking, well, this is going to be very interesting because one part of her is going to love her mother, and the other part's going to hate her father. And so I really sat with it, said to God, well, where are we going with this one? And I asked her if she would create a collage of what all those voices inside of her had to say. And she created a spiral, and it showed how all these personality parts were connected. And what surrounded all of these personalities was a personality that had not come out in her therapy. And that personality's name was Grace. And I have to tell you, it took the breath out of me. It brought tears to my eyes of how God works. And, that was one of those stories that will stay with me forever. And I would also say to you, there was another story of a sister who really couldn't pray to Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Those God images were not available to her because of her history of abuse. And as we journeyed through her spiritual development, God revealed to her name, that God's name was Essence. And so for her, she found her personal relationship with God through that prayer, through her experience. And it takes a lot of faith to walk in a journey like that, to claim her adult image, her personal image of who God could be for her now.
Wow, Sister, thank you. What amazing work you did back in those early days, and really pioneering so much of this. Just tremendous. Jillian, I want to pull you into this conversation. We want to hear a little bit about your path to spiritual care and what drew you to St. John Vianney Center.
Yeah, it's so funny. If I could have told the Jillian of 10 years ago that this is where I would be, I wouldn't have believed you at all. But that's just a testament to, when you trust God and you let the Spirit lead you to where you need to be, you find yourself in some incredible places. So my background, I went to Newman University for psychology, and I double minored in theology and youth ministry. And because campus ministry was always my dream, after experiencing and being in campus ministry myself, I was like, wow, I could do this for a job. So that's what I set out to do. And then I did a year of service with the Jesuit Volunteer Corps after I graduated, and worked at a soup kitchen, and realized that if I really wanted to help people, I needed more of the theology background behind it. So I went to Boston College for my master's in theology and ministry. And while I was there, I had a spiritual director. That was the first time I've ever had spiritual direction. And I completely credit her for me graduating, for me having any type of sanity to this day. She really saved me. in a time where I really needed help. I lost my grandparents within like 9 months of each other by both of my grandmas, and they were like my whole life. So just with the grief and then with being in grad school and everything, it was just a lot. And she helped me so much. And I remember thinking, if I can do that for someone, that's what I want to do with my life. So after I did my grad work, I went back after was working at a high school for campus ministry and was a theology teacher, and went back for my certificate in spiritual direction. And then once I had it, I was like, all right, now what do I do with this? How do I become a spiritual director? And I was working, went back to Newman for a little while and was working there, and was kind of using the training for spiritual direction with a lot of the students, but it was kind of like an informal thing. And I really, really wanted to dive into spiritual direction. And every time I tried to go down different avenues, I was hitting dead ends. And then one day I get a message on LinkedIn from Eric Rainstorm, who's the director of spiritual care. And he was like, we have an opening, and I found you on LinkedIn. He was a fellow BC grad, and was like, I think this would be great. I had never heard of St. John Vianney before then, and looked it up, and was just, I was like, I could do spiritual direction full time as a job. This is incredible. So I came, and it's been incredible ever since. I mean, I really never thought I would do anything other than campus ministry. But again, I was just trusting where God was going to lead me, and ended up here. So it's been an incredible journey so far, and I've really enjoyed my time here.
That is an incredible journey. That's beautiful. Good old Eric saw you on LinkedIn and recruited you. That's awesome.
And people always said, "Oh, I got my job through LinkedIn." I'm like, "How is that even possible? Like, that's just like that'll never happen to me." And then until it did.
Yeah, that's perfect. That's a great story. That's a great story. Well, what does your role look like today here at St. John Vianney?
Yeah. So what I love about, well, there's a lot of things I love about this job, but one of the things is just how much I do one-on-one spiritual direction, but there's also opportunities to collaborate with the other spiritual directors, with the psychologists, psychiatrists. So with everyone here, it's really takes that holistic approach to wellness. So I'm able to use my psychology background, although it's very old and not very used, but I have kind of an understanding of the psychological background of things, and I'm able to support my residents spiritually and help kind of bridge those gaps between, unfortunately, I think sometimes we're told, especially if we're thinking about like depression, for an example, that, oh, if you pray hard enough, then it'll go away. Then God will just take that from you. And then that could result in a really negative relationship with God or view of God, because, am I not praying right? What am I doing wrong that you're not allowing this to go away? When, we know that there's a lot of cognitive issues or, need for medication that could really help take with that depression, and that there's so many other things to consider. So I have the honor of kind of helping to bridge that gap of like, just because you're taking an anxiety medication doesn't mean that your prayer is inadequate. Like, both of God is giving you these gifts so that you can achieve this wellness that you're searching. So I get to kind of work with both ends of the spectrum and really help residents find healing in ways that maybe they were closed off to before coming here.
Well, your background in psychology, your education, and that it's got to play a meaningful role. It sounds like it does, just to have even some basic understanding of what some of the challenges they might be facing, and then, of course, incorporating that into your spiritual direction on some level. That's beautiful.
And also the psychiatrists, psychologists, everyone here is so incredible. Like, in meetings, I just watch them go, and I'm like, I can't believe that I am working alongside of such amazing people that are so intelligent and so passionate and caring. And I learn so much every day. I had to, when I first started, I had to have a whole list of acronyms that I had no idea what they were, because I was like,
we love our acronyms here. Yes.
It's like 3 pages long with all these acronyms that I still have to go back and check to make sure that I'm understanding what's actually being said.
We love our acronyms here at St. John Vianney Center. Absolutely. Yeah, without a doubt. I love it. So Jillian, tell us, we heard a little bit from Sister Ann about, some of the needs she saw back, at the beginning. I'm sure some of that must ring familiar for you. What are some of the needs that you're seeing today with our residents?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of overlap still. Like I said before, a lot of, depression and anxiety comes up a lot. And also, I think finding, like you were saying before, this identity crisis, this finding out who they are outside of their work, of their vocation, because it could sometimes happen where, they're pouring their whole life into their ministry, and if someone is critical of that, it's taken so personally that like they're a failure, and it can just spiral. So understanding who they are outside of this as well is also really important for their mental health, and finding, different ways of self-care. Because another big issue is burnout, is that, it's so hard for these priests and religious to take time for themselves. They feel like when, their job is to serve others, and they just keep serving until they have nothing left to give. And kind of reminding them that it's okay to take a day off or a couple, or go on retreat, do things that fill your cup, because you can't pour out of an empty cup, which unfortunately I think is realized a bit too late sometimes. So I think that's another big one. And I think also, especially following the pandemic, seeing a lot of addiction, and also just personality issues of, wanting to be more introverted or recluse, or staying in, not wanting to do some of the more public ministries, or, going out and serving others, because they gotten so accustomed to being alone, or they were ordained during that time and they weren't able to celebrate in the way that they wanted to, or they couldn't have family present, or they experienced loss or in their life at that point, and they couldn't be there in the ways that they wanted to, or, were told that they couldn't go to the hospital to give, last rites, because they weren't allowed in there. So a lot of the grief or guilt or sadness that felt around that time too, I think is still, even 5 years later, is still being worked through and coming up a lot too. So I think that's another big part that we're seeing as well.
That's beautifully said, and I think it sounds in so many ways that you're kind of carrying forward the legacy of Sister Ann and everything that had begun. And is that how you see it? Kind of carrying that torch forward?
I hope so. I have big shoes to fill for sure. We're trying definitely to continue that legacy forward. Absolutely.
You know what I hear, Jillian? I hear humanity has its issues no matter what time or place. And that you're experiencing many of the issues that happened years ago. The people are just different. But the issues still happen in religious life over and over again because of the people.
And it's so interesting, as you were saying, that it was mostly women, because now it is mostly men, and we have a women's group that we had to pause for like almost a month because there was only one woman here. So it's so interesting even too how that dynamic has also shifted. I mean, it ebbs and flows, but I mean, the almost 9 months I've been here, there's never been a time where there's even been an equal number of men and women. There's always been more men than women. So that's really interesting too.
And Sister, hearing Jillian speak a little bit, and I know you still are very much connected to us in our mission. What do you see as some of the spiritual needs of residents, or even some of the folks that you see out in the field as one of our consultants? Do you feel that they've changed or evolved a little bit over the years, over the decades?
I do. The one thing that I hear Jillian speak about is the need for balance. People still, religious and clergy, can get involved with overwork because there are fewer of them and the demands are high. And so frequently they need to learn how to place boundaries on how much they can give before they're overloaded. And as Jillian said, unfortunately, what happens is people get burnt out because they gave too much. And probably all three of us can identify with times in our life
Oh, yeah.
when that happened. But I think one of the struggles that I even hear too is the influence of the pandemic.
Mhm.
The I think the changing face of the church with uh, clergy and religious living alone as opposed to living in groups. It brings on issues of loneliness and intimacy in different
Mhm.
ways than it used to be.
Yeah.
But as I think as Jillian shared about depression, it's helping people see that there are good people with something they are struggling with, and God is there with them.
Mhm.
So
Well,
it,
it's so true, sister. I mean, I think when you look at when you began this in the 80s, and you think what was parish life back then? Well, you had, at least most places had at least two or three priests, right?
yeah,
Even back then, and now you're lucky to have one priest and maybe a part-time associate, or maybe that associate has other jobs. Maybe that pastor is not just a pastor, but he's also the vicar general or the
Yeah.
chancellor, has some other big
exactly.
job at the
Mhm.
diocese. And so it's not just their full-time job at the parish, it's all the other things that are thrust on their
Right.
shoulders. It
Yeah.
feels like that's so much more predominant now than it was a couple
Yes.
decades
Yeah.
ago, from my own experience of working in the church, is what
Right.
I've seen.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we're also really seeing, I mean, priests fresh out of seminary getting pastor roles, that they're really just being thrown into this huge responsibility that a lot of times they don't feel ready for, but they don't really have much of a choice. And after a year or two, they're just burnt out. And that's just also been really difficult too, and feeling like how can they advocate for themselves when, especially when there's the vow of obedience in there. How do we also toe that line where I'm asking and advocating for things that I need, while also making sure that I'm doing everything I can to serve the people that I need to be serving. And also, especially with a lot of um, congregations or even churches are closing, or coming together, or that whole dynamic, who's in charge of closing a church and who's in charge of doing all these things, and they're looked at as it's their fault, and internalizing that as well. So there's all these different struggles going on that maybe they weren't anticipating having, especially that early on in their priesthood, that the weight of that they're carrying is so great that it's understandable that after a while that it becomes too much.
Yeah.
Um,
I think that one of the things too that you bring up, Jillian, is that for our folks entering seminaries today, what is their capacity for leadership?
Mm.
And that if that is not something that they have right now in their life, maybe it needs to their entrance into seminary life may need to be delayed until they are ready and are capable of taking on these leadership roles, because it's not that they don't want to be good priests. I think most people want to be good pastoral priests and sisters.
Mhm.
It's that the readiness for taking on those kind of responsibilities.
Mhm. Yeah, it's a great point.
Yeah.
and then, of course, even if they're ready to be a priest, like you said earlier, how soon are they going to be ready to be a pastor?
Right.
In some cases, they're barely used to being a priest, and
That's
now
right.
they got to learn how to be a pastor. And being a
Yeah.
pastor, it's almost like running a small business. It's not
Yeah.
just all the pastoral stuff, but it's
Mhm.
the toilet is clogged in the pastoral center, and I, I got to meet the electric guy out front about some issue with the power going to the rectory, and I got to
Mhm.
make sure the maintenance guy is doing his job, as well as being an HR person and
Right.
managing a budget. So many things, and
Yeah.
that it's very intense. And so,
Mhm.
yeah. So Jillian, all of that being said, and hearing about Sister Ann David's experience, do you see that? How does that shape kind of the way? How does that inform, I should say, maybe your practice of spiritual care now?
I I think in a lot of ways, I think it's a reminder of, especially, the beautiful story that you shared, when they're being asked to kind of lead some type of service for forgiveness, that, there's so many ways that you could take that, and you decided, draw, give me an image, so there's so many ways that God is able to reveal God's self to us and that we relate to God. And I think it's a reminder to keep exploring all those avenues, even if it's not, because I personally struggle with imagery. Like if in spiritual direction, if my spiritual director tries to like have me imagine something, like I get viscerally angry. Like I can't do it for some reason. Like me and imagery don't mix. But being open to that might be what my resident really needs is, or responds to, is using their creativity and their imagination to see, does God have a color? Does, their spirituality have, an object that personifies it, and not just, sticking to just scripture or just this one way of doing spiritual direction, but really being open to the Spirit and the many ways that we are able to relate to God through all these different avenues, and just to really be open to that and not to be afraid to explore those realms, and really just embrace it.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure, Sister Ann, as you worked your way here through the years, your thinking on all this probably evolved too. Just about how you implement your spiritual care practice here at St. John Vianney in light of maybe new information that came, to you, whether it be your understanding of the human person through psychology, or through the different ways in which you try to evoke, that pastoral care for the residents here.
Yes. I think, along with what Jillian spoke about, with sort of bringing in the added dimension of spiritual direction, I think the gift of discernment and being able to even teach people what consolation and desolation is, how their emotions, their body responses, help inform them about what is life-giving and what is destructive. They're different pathways that sometimes we haven't been taught. And I think that I always believed it. I'm so thrilled is that there's a lot of spiritual direction backgrounds in the pastoral staff, because I think that was very much needed.
Mm-hmm.
So from both of you, maybe thinking a little bit about the future now, where do you see, spiritual care going in the years ahead? We've talked a little bit about the past, a little bit about the present, but where do you see some of this evolving to in the next round of things? And that question is for either one of you. So whoever wants to jump in first.
Well, can I jump in?
Please. Yeah.
I think one of the issues that I talked about abuse issues, okay, various kinds of abuse issues. I think one of the things in writing now that is evolving is more about what is moral injury, what is soul trauma. And so much of when we look at people who represent church becoming the perpetrator of abuse, what we see is moral injury, that there is a deeper woundedness in terms of their soul. And that is, I think that I would say to you, we knew that, but they never had a name for it. And it was not, it's being written about today. And so my hope is that the DSM will get it added into psychology. I also think that one of the challenges that we face in our church is that among younger people, there is a stronger element of devotional practices. We could label them as conservative practices that were very different from the past. And so I guess my my challenge to that I see in our church today is our clergy and religious can lead congregations in devotions, but we can't keep adding one more devotion on top of another. Our people who live in this crazy world of computers and phones where immediacy is the answer need to learn how to live a more contemplative life. And so perhaps the balance of all of that could be helping people learn how to pause, provide opportunities of guided prayer for their congregations rather than fill them up with verbal devotions and songs. But it's a way of teaching them, how do you connect with God? What is happening in that holy hour other than you sitting there? So I think that that's a piece of that I would like to see as part of the formation of the new clergy and religious today.
Beautifully, beautifully said, Sister. How about you, Jillian? Where do you see some of the future of spiritual care heading?
Yeah, I mean, I agree 100% with what Sister Ann said. And, especially when it comes to the use of technology, it was helpful, especially in the pandemic, to have the live streams happening so people were still able to experience Mass. But I think now it's becoming a deterrent, especially if we're looking at lay people, or just the numbers of people going to church are dwindling, unfortunately. Or there's this push, or this movement to the label of being more spiritual than religious, and kind of losing the appeal to go to Mass. People don't understand why that's necessary. I could pray on my own. Why go? So creating a space within the church to make others feel welcomed, and not even just feel it, but know that they're welcomed. How can clergy help create that environment? I think authenticity is really important, especially coming from the pulpit. Having a priest say, I'm not perfect, but together we're going to figure this out. When I just moved back in January, and my husband and I were church hopping in Delaware County to figure out what our new church was going to be. And that's how we ended up picking the one that we did, because we just ended up being at Mass, and the priest was just so incredibly honest with his struggles and what the last few months have been for him, and how coming to Mass and being part of this community has helped. And just that reminder that priests and religious are human, and that not expecting them to be perfect, because I think even as a kid, growing up thinking that priests and religious were on this high level, and that it's not fair to them to hold them to this standard of perfection. And I think working here has helped me to realize, they're people just like me who are going to falter, because they're human, and allowing space for them to be imperfect, but then also allowing space for the congregation to also be imperfect. And together in our imperfectness, we're made whole through God's love and mercy. But instead of looking at an us and them kind of idea, but how can we all come together and make the church a place where all are truly welcomed and feel welcomed, and want to bring their families, and want to go where and pray together instead of by themselves, and feel that community aspect. Because even seeing it again, among even the residents here, that lack of community is really hard for people, because we're created to be relational. And when we take that part away and think we can replace it with likes on a post, our wealth and our view of ourselves gets depleted so easily. And reminding ourselves that our worth comes from God, and praying together is important, and receiving the Eucharist is important. And how can we create spaces where people feel that the gravity of that, and feel comfortable in celebrating that instead of the opposite?
Beautifully said. Beautifully said. Well, So we're going to, as we kind of bring our conversation to a close, I'd like to ask each of you just to share with us, if you will, kind of what is this? And you've already alluded to this because I can just see the excitement and the joy that you both have, and this sense of accomplishment. It's beautiful what you've done for the church and for these men and women. But maybe what this ministry has meant to you personally, and if you have one little piece of advice or encouragement for other spiritual care advisors you could offer. Sister Ann, would you like to go first?
Oh, geez.
Oh, gee, I'm
What
sorry.
has to be? My ministry at St. John Vianney invited me to look at wholeness and healing in humanity. It also helped me to walk with people to know our God is extravagantly loving and forgiving and merciful and compassionate. And to be able to interiorize a loving God and to know that through their personal experience while they were here is something I believe that they will carry forward, and nobody can ever take that away from them, because many of the people who have come here had things taken away from them that were beyond their control. So I would say walking, I guess St. John Vianney will always be a part of my life.
Beautifully said, sister. Beautifully said. How about you, Jillian? We gave you time to think about it now.
Oh, it doesn't help if that makes you feel any better, Sister Ann.
You did such a great job. You set the bar really high.
I only had 39 years to think about it.
Oh gosh. Well, I mean, what it's meant to me, I mean, this has been, like I said, I did not see this coming, and I find it, I'm grateful and shocked and honored every single day that I get to do this work, that God chose me to do this work. And I think this also kind of leads into, the piece of advice or encouragement. I think the first couple of months of my time here, I was just in awe of everyone and how incredible everyone was. And I'm just like, how am I in the same category as all these people? Like, this is crazy. And was really hard on myself and feeling like, I wasn't smart enough, or I didn't know enough, or that, I'm too young, or whatever the insert negative thought there of why I wasn't qualified to do this. But one of my favorite quotes is that God doesn't call the qualified, he qualifies the called. And really holding on to that and knowing that really, when you feel called to something, to follow it, even if it's scary, even if you feel like you don't know what you're doing, that God is going to be walking with you in that, and will qualify you and give you the strength and the wisdom and the patience, and as you need it, and to really trust in that, especially even when what I love most about this job too is that I don't know if Sister Ann, you have found this in your work in spiritual direction, but I find myself in a lot of situations that I'm talking to my resident about, or things that I've been personally praying about for myself to grow in compassion, or to help me in my grief, or to help me in whatnot. And then I hear myself giving, saying this, asking like my resident to hold space for some self-compassion, and, and whatever the thing is. And then I close the door and I'm like, that was literally what I was just praying about for myself. And now I'm here giving that same advice, or the same, have conversation to the residents, and, that they don't even realize how much they help me too in my spiritual journey and in my healing, and just in their bravery and honesty. Doing this work is not easy, being in those meetings that they have to be in, and learning about themselves in such in a clinical way, in a spiritual way, and going through this healing process is not easy. And it takes a lot of courage and strength to do that. And in their bravery and courage and strength, I find that I gain that myself too. So they're showing me God's love and mercy without them even realizing it. And it's such an honor to be able to hold space for them, but a privilege to also grow and learn from them as well too. So it's been more than ever I could have ever imagined. And I'm just so excited to see what the future holds in spiritual care as a whole, but especially here.
Well, I'm excited as well. And I just want to thank you both for sharing your beautiful reflections with us today. This was a wonderful conversation. I learned a lot. I'm sure our listeners have learned a lot through this. And it's really inspiring to hear how spiritual care at St. John Vianney Center just continues to be such a vital part of our mission, especially from those first foundational years all the way to the work that's being done today. And then this beautiful vision that you've laid out for the future. So thank you both for being here.
Oh,
Thank
you're
you.
welcome. Thank you.
It was so fun.
It was good being
It
with
was
all of
fun.
you.
We'll do it again. Well, that's our show today. I want to thank you all for joining us for this episode of Journey to Thrive. I hope this conversation has been enlightening and inspiring. I know it has been for me. If you'd like to learn more about the St. John Vianney Center or connect with Sister Ann or Jillian, check out the links in the show notes of this episode. Be sure to subscribe, follow us on social media, and if you're watching on YouTube, give this episode a like. It really helps our algorithm and helps us to get noticed. Your support helps us to continue to spread this important message. Thank you again for listening, and may God bless you.